Thanks very much, Anne. I'm going to be changing my will to have you as my funeral celebrant. Can't think of a better person. Okay, our next launch will be of Speaking in Tongues by Basil Eliades. I met Basil some years ago. He actually came to the studio to talk about his work, and he said, you know, let me just present it to you and see what you think. And I can still recall the session where he actually stood up on the coffee table, and the studio is not a huge area, stood up on the coffee table and he began proclaiming his work. And the roof literally lifted. That's how good it was. So also a returning author to Interactive Press, Victorian Basil Eliades, previously published Third Eye and 50 IV with IP. A consummate performer of his poetry, Basil is also a highly respected visual artist. See the cover of his latest two books, and in this latest IP title, A Spirited Word Traveler. Please welcome Basil.
Diluted Vietnam. Carried on the hot, wet, heavy air, the first smell that hits me, I learn later, is sun-dried shrimp. But to say that is to classify it. Imagine instead depth of flavour, complexity of salt, saturation of senses. Imagine fragrant stocks simmering, rice paper rolls being fried, meat being grilled, wafts of petrol fumes, ginger, garlic being chopped and fried, fresh flowers, rotting rubbish, an ancestor being burned. These smells and more hit me repeatedly as I walk through the streets of Hanoi. And what I hear is cars, the sound of cities, but also bikes and selling and cooking and buying, people hawking food, practicing or perfecting their haggling, bags shifting, stools and tables being set, metal against concrete, plastic against metal, restaurants opening, doors closing. And what I see is everything. Fill in bit here, skipping paragraph, haven't got time. I have been here almost 24 hours, but this is my first foray outside. The flight from the UK took its toll, and the temperature change hit me in every functioning organ. So I'm strolling through the remains of the French design and aesthetic in a small Asian city, another land, and see ahead a small lake, which the guidebooks mention may or may not have a resident 100-year-old tortoise. I pause onto the trees in the middle of the steam and the smells, and there's an old woman waist deep among the water lilies. She's a Westerner, that's clear, and she's holding a piece of paper in both hands, and she is reverentially, repeatedly dipping this in and out of the water, in a gap between the flowers and a pond scum. I wait till she finishes doing whatever it is she's doing, and as she slowly clambers out of the pond, I ask respectfully what it was she was doing. It is a long story, she answers in heavily accented English. Vous êtes français? I ask. Ben oui, she replies. Would you tell me the long story? She looks at me for a long moment. Oui, she says again. She motions me towards her bench, where she lowers herself onto a towel and wraps another around her shoulders. My father died when I was very young, she begins. Her voice is quiet, but it's strong, and she drops her eyes to the paper on her lap, and as though she's reading from it, she continues talking. And he left me with so much money I would never have to work. This could have given me a crisis. I could have given the money away or drunk it or gambled it, but I wanted something to do. So I resolved to learn something. I met Marc Chagall in the 1950s when I was 18, and I asked him if I could be his assistant. I said I would work unpaid because I wanted to learn everything I could about watercolour. So I worked in his studio, cleaning his brushes, preparing his canvases, and studying, learning from the great man everything I could, whenever I could. And I travelled with him to Israel, to Greece, to Italy. Those days, these were strange and wonderful places. These days, everything is very similar. Cities may have different flavours, but the flavours today are similar and similarly bland. But then, I learned a great deal about watercolour, and I became quite good at its use. And she learns how to see light and how to fall in love with it, skipping a paragraph. I travelled only by foot, or by bicycle, or by animal, never mechanised transport. And every month, when I was 30 years old, I left Mark and began to travel on my own in the 1960s. Okay, she's travelling by herself, 1960s, 30 years old. I travelled only by foot or bicycle, by animal, never mechanised transport except over water, and every month I would execute one watercolour. It was always of water, but the subject was light. Do you see? Everything is about light. So I would find a body of water, a stream, a bath, a pond, a beach, a puddle, a pool, a kitchen sink, a horse trough, and learn from it. I would paint it. Only once each month. But you see, these things accumulate. So after 20 years of travelling by myself, I had 240 paintings, all rolled up and put into tubes and sent back to be stored in my family home in Nice. And in 1982, I returned home. For 10 years, I rested and read and meditated on the paintings I had produced and the work in them and the love I felt for the light. And after those 10 years, I decided it was time to prepare for death. Preparing for death is not done lightly. The road to death is hard for most of us, so I had to do this very carefully, very consciously. I wanted to articulate my decisions, to choose my road, to choose my path. I wanted to clear out the baggage of my life and leave the planet lightly. So, in the mid-1990s, I embarked on the road again, one last time, and I have been travelling since. She smiled at my gape and lowered her gaze to the paper again. Yes, over 20 years of travelling for someone of my age is hard indeed, yes. And this time I will tell you the journey was yet more difficult. It was more difficult this time because I had to revisit every body of water I had previously painted from. And I wanted to do it in reverse order, so that I started with the last body of water I visited in 1982 and visited that one first. And you will understand, of course, that water moves constantly. It is never static, not even as ice. So every body of water had, of course, changed. But many of them simply could not be found. A kitchen sink. That house was completely gone. A horse trough. Ha! The farm was completely gone. A puddle. What a ridiculous notion. But I wanted to see that light again, to see whether what I had seen in that first instance was still there, in any way. So when the puddle wasn't there, I waited for it to rain. When the trough wasn't there, I used another. When the pond had been cemented over, I found one nearby, but it took longer, yes, much longer. Sometimes months for just one. She paused and she looked down again. Somewhat sadly, I thought, but I couldn't be sure. So what I did, she continued, when I found again those bodies of water, was I took the watercolour I had made 30 or 40 years earlier, and after looking and thinking and meditating on it, dipped it again into the water, over and over, and washed clean the paper, and returned my inspiration to whence it had come. She paused again, this time for a long time. And just now when you came up and asked me what I was doing, I was quite moved. I must tell you, because in all these decades no one has ever asked me what I was doing. No one cared. I cared. I cared. And I don't mind that no one asked, but I just find it extraordinary that you did. And I have heard nothing of you. I do not know who you are. I know nothing of you, except you are willing to listen. Thank you. And I should tell you, she smiled, that I have wondered about this life of mine, and whether it has been valid, valuable, worthy. I do not think it was. I do not think I've contributed anything to peace freedom or wisdom for the greater community, but I can tell you I have found this life worth living. I have gained from it. I have grown. And I should tell you, friend, that this paper here, this image I have just washed off, this is the very last image. This is the one I painted first. When she held up the paper she had been contemplating all this time, I looked at it. There was nothing there.